Eli Morgan had never feared the dark. As a boy growing up in the peaceful town of Lexington, his imagination had always been his best friend, not his enemy. He used to build forts with pillows, make up stories of pirates and knights, and fall asleep dreaming of stars and galaxies. But that was before the voice came. At first, it was just a strange feeling. A shiver when he was alone, a flicker in the corner of his eye, a whisper that he thought came from the vents or maybe from the old pipes in the walls. But with time, the whisper became clearer. It wasn't a sound he could record. It wasn't a voice anyone else could hear. It came from somewhere in the shadows of his own mind, and it had a name that it refused to speak. "You're weak, Eli," it would say. "They're laughing at you. Even your friends don't care." And Eli, young and unsure, began to believe it. The change wasn't sudden, but it was deep. His laughter faded, his shoulders slumped, and his eyes, once curious and bright, began to dim. His mother, Claire Morgan, was a single parent working long hours at the community hospital. She noticed the difference, of course, but she thought it was just puberty, or maybe the pressure of middle school. "Just a phase," she'd say, her voice laced with both worry and denial. But Richard Morgan, Eli's grandfather, saw something else. Richard had been a psychologist for 30 years, but more than that, he was a man of deep faith. Though his bookshelves were lined with academic titles, there was always a worn leather-bound book on his nightstand, full of wisdom, ancient prayers, and a quiet power. When he watched Eli withdraw, a chill ran through him, not just as a grandfather, but as a man who had seen too many minds fall prey to what science couldn't always explain. One weekend, Claire brought Eli to stay at Richard's house. She hoped the change of scenery might help, but it was more than that. It was destiny moving quietly in the background. Richard didn't ask questions at first. He simply watched. He noticed how Eli's eyes darted around when he entered a room, how he flinched at sudden noises, how he seemed to be listening to something no one else could hear. On the third night, just after dinner, Eli asked if he could sleep in Richard's room. Richard agreed, and once the lights were off and the silence settled, Eli whispered, "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Eli," Richard said gently. "Do voices ever lie to you?" Richard turned in his chair slowly. "What kind of voices?" Eli hesitated. "The kind you don't hear with your ears. The kind that tell you you're nothing. That everyone hates you. That there's no point to anything." Richard's heart sank, but he remained calm. He stood, walked over to his desk, and pulled out the leather-bound book. "Eli," he said, "what you're hearing, it's real. Not because others can hear it, but because it's affecting you. But that voice isn't yours, and it doesn't belong in your head." Eli sat up, curious. "Then whose is it?" "There are whisperers in this world," Richard said, sitting beside him. "Some are people. Some are things. And some come from deeper places. They don't shout. They hide. They twist the truth until it feels like your own thoughts. But they fear light. And they vanish when you remember who you are, and who protects you." Eli listened, wide-eyed, as his grandfather recited a short prayer. "Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the King of mankind, the God of mankind, from the evil of the whisperer who withdraws, who whispers in the hearts of mankind, among jinn and among men." It was like something inside Eli shifted. A light. A pulse. A breath of wind through a stale, closed window. "Say that every time you hear the voice," Richard said. "Say it with your heart. Not as a spell, but as a shield." From that night forward, Eli began his quiet battle. The voice didn't stop, but it started retreating. Like fog under sunlight, like a shadow chased by dawn. At school, things were still hard. His friend, Nathan, had grown distant. Rumors swirled about Eli being strange, and teachers assumed he was just lazy or distracted. But Eli no longer fought alone. He carried the prayer with him, sometimes on his lips, always in his chest. But the voice changed tactics. It started using people. A girl in class named Megan began teasing him more than usual. A teacher gave him detention unfairly. And at home, even Claire started snapping at him, overworked and overtired. The voice returned, bolder now. "See? Even your mother's tired of you. Just disappear." Eli ran out of the house that evening and wandered into the woods behind Richard's house. The air was cold, the sky gray. He sat beneath an old tree and cried. That's when he heard it, not the voice but the wind. It carried leaves across the ground like whispers that meant no harm. And in that stillness, a different voice spoke, this one not from within, but beyond. "You are not alone." Eli stood up, wiped his tears, and walked back to the house. Richard was waiting at the door. He said nothing, just pulled Eli into a hug. That night, Eli had a dream. He stood in a field of mirrors, each reflecting a different version of himself. Angry, afraid, ashamed, bitter, proud, broken. And in the center stood a version of him made of light, calm, and steady. The other versions screamed, taunted, laughed. But the light, Eli raised his hand and recited the same prayer, "I seek refuge." And one by one, the broken reflections shattered. When Eli woke up, the sun was shining. But the war wasn't over. The whisperer had retreated, not surrendered. And in the coming days, it would fight back harder than ever. And Eli would have to choose, not once, but every single day, between listening to the shadows or walking toward the light. The whisperer had not vanished. It had simply changed form. While Eli Morgan believed he was gaining strength, the voice found new ways to slither in, less direct, more cunning. It began using silence instead of sound, suggestion instead of words. Now, instead of hearing direct insults in his mind, Eli began feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. Like something terrible was about to happen. Like everyone he loved was in danger. His chest tightened often. He avoided eye contact. He no longer trusted the laughter of classmates. It felt like mockery. Even kindness seemed suspicious. This was not the same voice that once whispered cruel sentences. This was a more sophisticated evil. Subtle, strategic, and serpentine. Eli didn't tell anyone about the shift. Not his mother, who seemed even more exhausted lately. Not his teachers, who were beginning to label him with terms like emotionally reactive. Not even his grandfather, who he feared would worry or think the prayer had stopped working. Eli still said the verses. He still carried the handwritten prayer in his pocket. But some days, even that felt like a defense made of paper against something that felt like iron chains. It was during this time that he met Dr. Peter Sloan, the new school counselor. Tall, bald, and quiet-spoken, Dr. Sloan had a background in trauma psychology and had just moved from Chicago. At first, Eli didn't trust him. He was just another adult, another person who would pretend to listen. But during their first meeting, Dr. Sloan didn't ask any questions. He simply handed Eli a small sheet of paper with one sentence on it. "Not all voices in your head belong to you." Eli blinked. "What is this?" Dr. Sloan smiled gently. "Just something to think about." That day, Eli went home early. Richard picked him up, and on the drive home, Eli finally spoke. "Grandpa, what if the voice isn't outside me anymore? What if it's become me?" Richard didn't answer at first. When they reached home, he went to his room and returned with an old photograph. It showed a young Richard, looking pale and gaunt, sitting on a hospital bed. "I was once in a very dark place," Richard said, setting the photo beside Eli. "After your grandmother died, I let the voice win. I believed it was me, that I was broken, useless, done. But the truth is, that voice wears masks. It never says, 'I am evil.' It says, 'I am you.' And that's the greatest lie it ever tells." Eli stared at the photo. "How did you fight it?" "I didn't," Richard replied. "At least not alone. I prayed, yes. But I also let people in. You see, son, whisperers live in darkness. And their biggest fear is exposure." Eli remembered the mirrors in his dream. The broken versions of himself. The light. That night, Eli didn't just pray, he began writing. Not in a diary, but in a notebook he labeled, "Exposures." He wrote every lie the voice had ever told him. every shadow that had haunted him, every fake version of himself. Then beneath each one he wrote, "You are not me." The next morning, something shifted. Not outside but within. Eli stood straighter. He wore blue, his favorite color, instead of the usual black. At school, he still felt nervous. Megan still whispered behind his back. Nathan still kept his distance. But when the voice tried to tell him, "You don't belong here," Eli said quietly, under his breath, "I seek refuge." Days passed, then weeks, and Eli began to change, not into someone else, but into who he truly was beneath the fear. He joined the school newspaper. He told Dr. Sloan about the notebook. He shared the prayer with another quiet student named Liam, who admitted he too heard whispers of worthlessness. But evil never retreats without resistance. One Friday afternoon, Eli was walking home from school when he noticed a man across the street staring at him. The man wore a gray coat, too heavy for spring. His face was calm, his eyes blank. Eli froze. The man didn't speak. He just nodded, then turned and walked away. But that night, the whisperer returned. Not as a voice this time, but as a dream. Eli stood in the forest again. But this time it was different. The trees were dead. The sky was blood red. And in the center stood the man in the gray coat. "You think you're safe now," he whispered. "You think words protect you? You think you can resist me?" Eli tried to speak the prayer, but no sound came out. He tried to run, but his legs felt like stone. The man stepped closer, and as he did, his face began to change. Into Richard's, then Dr. Sloan's, then his own. "I am everyone," the man said. "I am everywhere. I am already inside." Eli woke up screaming. Richard was there in seconds, holding him. "What did you see?" he asked gently. Eli told him everything. Richard listened carefully, then said, "Evil has no face of its own. That's why it steals others. That's why it whispers, never speaks. That's why it lies, never tells. And dreams are its playground. But listen to me, Eli. You woke up. That means it didn't win." Eli nodded, wiping his tears. "But it's stronger now." "Yes," Richard said, "because you're closer to the truth." That week, Eli wrote a speech and delivered it at school during a mental health awareness assembly. He didn't name the prayer. He didn't talk about religion. But he spoke about the voice. The scariest thing about the voice, he told the audience, is not that it whispers mean things. It's that it tries to sound like you. It wears your face. It walks in your shoes. It tells you that your worst fears are your only truths. But it's lying. And the only way to beat it is to call it out. You're not broken. You're not alone. You're not the voice. There was silence. Then applause. Then something Eli never expected. Megan, the girl who used to mock him, came up afterward with tears in her eyes. "My brother hears the voice too," she whispered. Eli handed her a small piece of paper, the same prayer his grandfather had given him. "Give him this," he said. "It's a start." That night, Eli didn't dream of forests or gray-coated men. He dreamed of light, of mirrors shattering, of people standing together, hand in hand, saying the words, "I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind." And the whisperer watched from afar, unable to enter. But it wasn't over. Because the final battle was yet to come. The sky over Lexington had turned heavy in recent weeks, not just with clouds, but with the pressure of something unseen. Eli Morgan, now 13, walked through each day with a growing sense of awareness. He could feel it in the way people looked at each other, the tension beneath polite greetings, the way silence lingered longer than it used to. It was as though the whisperer wasn't just after him anymore, it was after everyone. And it had found new ways to spread. Screens, headlines, anger, isolation, comparison. Everywhere, people seemed tired. Not just physically, but spiritually hollow. Even Claire, his mother, had begun snapping more often, muttering things like, "I'm just tired of pretending everything's fine," even when no one was asking her to. Eli noticed how she would stare at her phone for hours, scrolling through news and social feeds, only to emerge with a sigh that sounded more like surrender. His best friend Nathan had stopped responding to texts altogether. And Liam, the quiet boy he'd shared the prayer with, had missed 3 days of school. Eli knew something was happening. Something deeper than just mental health. The Whisperer was evolving. It was no longer hiding in dark corners. It was walking in daylight, wearing 1,000 masks, infiltrating people through bitterness, fear, and distraction. Richard had warned him this might happen. Evil doesn't knock, he said one evening. It waits until you open the door yourself. Through envy, through obsession, through rage. And once it's inside, it starts whispering, "You deserve this. You're entitled. They wronged you." And people believe it. Because the Whisperer never commands. It just agrees with your worst instincts. Eli took those words seriously. He began studying not just the prayer, but the meaning behind it. What did it mean to seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the King of mankind, the God of mankind? Why those 3 titles? Why not just say, God? Richard smiled when asked. Because the enemy attacks in 3 places, he said. Your identity, your value, and your allegiance. First, it tells you you're worthless. That attacks your sense of self. Second, it says others rule you. That removes your authority. Third, it tells you there is no higher truth. That severs your purpose. But the verse reminds us, we are under the care of one who created us, reigns over us, and alone deserves our worship. It reclaims every piece the Whisperer tries to steal. Eli felt like he was beginning to understand. He began journaling more deeply. He created 3 columns in his notebook. Who I am, who rules me, what I serve. He filled them with truths. I am more than my failures. I serve no fear. I belong to something greater. And the more he wrote, the more the darkness shrank. But just as he began to stand taller, the Whisperer struck harder, this time, through his mother. One night, Eli heard Claire crying in her room. Her door was cracked. He peeked in and saw her hunched over a stack of bills. Her phone buzzed with reminders. Overdue, final notice, pending disconnect. She gripped her temples. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. I'm a terrible mother. Just a burden. Eli's heart cracked. The voice had reached her. He stepped into the room quietly. Mom. She jumped, quickly wiping her face. What are you doing up? I heard you crying. I'm fine, she said too quickly. Just tired. Go to bed. Eli stepped closer. I know that voice, Mom. The one that says you're not enough. It lies. I used to believe it too. I still fight it. But it's not you. Claire blinked, stunned. He reached into his pocket and handed her the folded prayer, worn and faded now. This helped me. It might help you. She stared at it. You believe in this? I believe in what it reminds me, Eli said. That I'm not alone. That the one whispering isn't stronger than the one protecting me. Claire looked at him for a long moment, then silently reached out and pulled him into a hug, the kind that lasted longer than usual, the kind that said, thank you, without speaking. From that night, Claire began changing too. Small things. She deleted toxic apps from her phone. She began playing soft music in the mornings. She smiled more often, even if just briefly. The Whisperer hadn't left her, but now, it was no longer unseen. Meanwhile, things at school escalated. Nathan returned, but he wasn't the same. His once goofy energy had turned dark. He mocked teachers, picked fights, and looked at Eli with distant eyes. One afternoon, Eli found him alone behind the gym. Nathan, he said gently. What happened? Nathan scoffed. You mean since you abandoned me? I didn't abandon you. You did. You started acting weird. Talking to yourself. Pretending like you're some kind of prophet. I was fighting something, Eli said. Something you might be fighting too. Nathan's face changed. Don't act like you know me. You don't know what I hear at night. What I see. You don't know the voice. Eli stepped closer. Actually, I do. Nathan's jaw tightened. Then you know. It never leaves. No, Eli said. But it loses power. Every time we speak truth. Every time we remember who we are. Nathan's eyes flashed. You think a poem helps? It's not a poem. It's a sword. He handed Nathan a small card with the verse. Nathan stared at it for a long time, then shoved it in his pocket without a word. 2 nights later, Nathan called him. He didn't say much. Just, thanks. I slept through the night for the first time in months. But while Eli helped others, his own battles deepened. The whisperer now came in waves, less frequent, but more ferocious. It whispered during moments of success. You're just pretending. They'll find out. It crept in during laughter. They'll turn on you. It poisoned moments of quiet. Why bother? Eli began feeling worn. The battle was constant. His notebook grew thicker. His shoulders heavier. And one night, while walking home, he passed a broken church. Its windows were shattered, the doors half-rotted. But as he looked inside, he saw someone sitting on the altar. An old man, still as a statue. Eli stepped inside. Hello. The man turned slowly. His eyes were kind. Looking for something? Eli hesitated. I don't know. Maybe just peace. The man nodded. The kind of peace that comes from outside you, but settles within? Eli nodded. The man reached into his coat and handed him a candle. Then light this. Not for the room. For your chest. Eli took it, unsure. Will it help? It will remind you, the man said. Peace is not the absence of whispers. It's the presence of a stronger voice. The one who says, You are mine. I am your Lord, your King, your God. Eli lit the candle and felt something stir inside, a warmth not of flame, but of faith. He walked home slowly that night, whispering the prayer over and over. Not to chase the dark, but to flood it with light. And for the first time in a long time, the shadows did not follow. The days grew colder, though summer was still weeks away. It wasn't the weather. Eli felt it in the atmosphere, as if something was closing in. Despite everything, the prayers, the healing, the people he'd helped, there remained a heaviness, a final test hovering on the horizon. He could feel it during breakfast with his mother, even when she smiled. He could feel it at school, where more and more students now carried shadows behind their eyes. Even Richard, usually steady as a mountain, had grown more serious lately, often pausing mid-sentence to look out the window, as though waiting for something. And then the whisperer changed again. No longer content to haunt thoughts, it had begun appearing in reality, or so it seemed. Strange dreams blurred with waking life. Shadows that didn't belong to any object. Conversations that twisted into suspicion. Claire began speaking of hopelessness again, even though the bills were manageable now. Nathan stopped returning messages. Liam dropped out of school altogether. Eli stood at the center of it all, watching as the world around him bent toward collapse. He still whispered the prayer under his breath, I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, but the words now trembled on his tongue. Not because he doubted them, but because the enemy had learned his rhythm. It anticipated him, countered him. This wasn't just a battle in his mind anymore. It had become a battle for his world. One evening, as the wind howled and the lights flickered, Richard called him into the study. It's time you understand, he said, pulling a key from around his neck. He opened a chest that Eli had never seen before. Inside were pages, worn, ancient, lined with handwritten notes and bound with twine. This isn't just your fight, Richard said. It's a fight that spans generations. And you are the latest in a long line of people called to resist the unseen. Eli flipped through the pages. They were filled with accounts of people from different centuries, different continents, all of them describing the same thing. A whisper, a shadow, a presence that fed on despair and identity. It has always been here, Richard said. But it thrives in silence. That's why your voice, your truth, is your greatest weapon. The words on the page began to blur as a low hum filled the room. The lights flickered once, then twice, then died. And in that moment, Eli knew the whisperer had come in full. It didn't need to hide anymore. He heard it clearly now, not as a thought, not even as a voice, but as a presence, something that wrapped around him like smoke and ice. "Do you really believe you've won?" it hissed. "You've helped a few, but look around. You're losing. Every day." Eli stepped into the dark hallway of Richard's home. The shadows stretched like claws. But he didn't run. "You speak," Eli said aloud, "but you never stay." "I'm always here," the whisperer replied. "Long before you. Long after. I am doubt. I am pride. I am self-hate. I am envy. You're just a child. And you," Eli said, "are a lie." The shadows pulsed. Eli reached into his pocket, pulling out the candle from the old church, the one he had never lit again since that night. He struck a match and touched it to the wick. The flame rose, not large, but pure. "I seek refuge," he said softly. "No one's listening," the voice laughed. "I seek refuge," Eli said again, louder now. "In the Lord of mankind." The flame brightened. The King of mankind. The shadows retreated. The God of mankind. A crack split the hallway wall. The ceiling above trembled. "From the evil of the whisperer, who withdraws." The voice screamed, not in anger, in fear. "Who whispers into the hearts of mankind." The wind blew inward, not outward, sucking the darkness away from the flame. "Among jinn and among men." And with that final verse, the house fell silent. No storm, no noise, no voice. Eli collapsed to his knees. Richard appeared seconds later, flashlight in hand. "It's done, isn't it?" Eli nodded. "For now." But they both knew the truth. Evil never dies. It waits. It adapts. It learns new names and wears new faces. Yet something had changed in Eli, not just a boy who had survived the darkness, but someone who now carried light. In the following months, Eli published a book of reflections and shared his experience through a youth outreach called the Shield Project. Teens and even adults from across the state wrote letters, thanking him for putting into words what they had only felt in silence. Claire began leading support groups for single mothers, sharing her journey of reclaiming self-worth. Nathan returned to school and later became a counselor in training. Liam, quiet, shy Liam, published a graphic novel based on his battle with the whisper in the trees. But Eli continued listening, not for the voice, but for those who had no one else to hear them. He knew now that his mission wasn't to silence all whispers. It was to be a louder voice for truth. A reminder that no one walks alone, and that the prayer, simple, ancient, powerful, still had the power to shatter darkness. Say, "I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the King of mankind, the God of mankind, from the evil of the whisperer who withdraws, who whispers into the hearts of mankind, among jinn and among men." And somewhere, even now, as another soul trembles beneath the weight of unseen chains, a candle is being lit, a whisper is being silenced, and a light is answering.